Hello, beautiful people. My name is Jacob.
And I'm Cassie.
All right, Cassie, you and I, we had this crazy idea, right? We're just like, hey, you like teaching, I like teaching. We're on a psych program.
We like to listen to ourselves talk.
We're very narcissistic, you and I. We've established this fairly well. If you talk to anyone in our department, they'll be like, oh, it's those two.
Oh.
We know, we got it. So we're doing the Millennial Thing. We're starting a podcast. I guess the first thing someone might ask is, why are you starting a podcast? And really, who are you? So, like, how would you approach those two questions?
I'm going to start with who I am. My name is Cassie Witt, and I am a fifth-year doctoral student in the experimental psychology program at the University of Alabama, where I have a concentration in social psychology. And the reason I want to start this podcast, I mean, I suppose you alluded to it earlier, but I really care about teaching. And I'm also a lover of podcasts. So, as I'm thinking about potential hobbies I can have, hopefully after I graduate, I was like, maybe this could be one, right? I can talk about things that I'll be doing for my career that I also just genuinely enjoy talking about. What about you, Jacob? How would you answer those questions?
Good question, Cass. I wonder who asked that.
I guess they're okay questions.
My name is Jacob Miranda. So I'm a third-year doctoral student. So you're a little bit older than me, old lady. I'm the nice youngin' in the lab.
Right.
And we both work in the same lab under Dr. Alexa Tellett. As far as who I am, originally I'm from California, got my master's in IO in good old Texas, and now I'm trying to get that PhD in experimental social psych for two reasons, right? When people associate IO psych, they typically like, oh, get your master's and make that money, honey. I'm like, sure, I feels that. But I really do love teaching. Genuinely, truly. Like I know some people in academia are in like the R1 institution, race to like pub, grant. And I love research, don't get me wrong. But there's something special when someone who hasn't been exposed to psychology or someone who only has like minimal information learns about all these wonderful, cool things and like trying to understand human behavior. Like there's a spark there that I just love. And I've just seen teaching gotten so badly for so many people. And I don't think it's necessarily teachers' faults, but I think there's like a lot of frustration on like, well, how do I teach? Do I have enough time to teach? Some teachers, it feels like people believe like that they're just born, that you can't train a teacher or you can't improve on your skills. And I wholeheartedly disagree with that. I think in part, that's why I wanted to start this podcast, is to like get people excited for teaching, even if they wouldn't see themselves initially that as an educator being their primary identity.
You're so passionate, Jacob. I love it. I love the energy.
It's that caffeine. It's that caffeine. All those shots I'm just taking right before. So as far as like who should listen to us, I was talking about kind of like educators first times, but I don't think those are the only people who would have to listen to us. So like I can imagine anyone who's like early career researcher, graduate student, or even faculty members initially could get benefit, because some of the topics we're going to be covering is like imposter syndrome. I don't care how old you are. That still creeps in from time to time. But we'll also go into like new budding teachers who like have first time teaching. How do I start? Do they call me Mr. or Mrs.? Do they call me Doctor? Mm-hmm. Cass, do you go by like Dr. Witt? As like I know some graduate students, and this is true, who like they are still graduate students, but they want their students to call them like Dr. So and so. And it's like,
oh no.
Yeah, that's like, I don't know about that one. But then like I've also heard people criticize anyone who like tries to say, oh, my students call me by my first name, as unprofessional, which I also don't necessarily agree with. So there's something there. What else will we be covering in this podcast, Cassie, besides just like those basic like first time teaching stuff?
Yeah, I definitely don't think the topics that we will cover are things that only first-time teachers will want to hear. I think a lot of our conversations, hopefully, will be transferable to people in a variety of positions in academia, right? So people who are already faculty members or, graduate students who probably are teaching for the first time and don't have a lot of teaching experience yet, or really just anybody interested in pedagogy. A lot of the things that we will talk about aren't just applicable for people who teach psychology, but, if you are in a position where you are teaching in higher education, then I think these things will probably be relevant to you.
And I agree. And I think even for like people who are really well established, what you and I try to do, right? And maybe I don't want to speak on your behalf, but like we do try to push the boundaries of like traditional teaching and try to bring in like newer kind of perspectives on or more modern perspectives. Things like ungrading, things like I know you're in love with flipped classrooms. We always don't implement them perfectly. Sometimes you and I make mistakes. So like maybe this podcast is just really a secret counseling session for you and I to be like, where did I go wrong? I thought I was doing everything right. And sometimes you have those days. I tried my best, but the students were responsive.
Yeah, I definitely think that we face a lot of those challenges because we do make it a point to, I guess, experiment with our pedagogy and try to be innovative, which of course is met with pushback sometimes, both from like other people in your department or the students that you have in your class who have never encountered something like ungrading or a flipped classroom before, which sometimes can be really exciting as an instructor, but sometimes can also be incredibly frustrating. So, yeah, if this ends up just being a counseling session for you and I where we can vent about our experiences, that's perfectly fine with me.
I mean, the only thing I would probably like to add on to that is like, let's say you're just a random average Joe or Jane or they, right? And you're not necessarily an educator per se, but like you have a general interest in psychology. We're probably going to be covering a lot of classic effects and how we might teach them, but hopefully that could be the education perspective there, especially with ongoing issues like the replication crisis or things going on with open science. And even then, I think it's always important, or at least how I try to start this, but this idea of that at the end of the day, educators are human beings, teachers are human beings, they're not perfect. And I feel like there's this situation where students or parents, or even sometimes our peers expect perfection out of us. And it's like, I want to go home, I want to rest, I want to net. Like, I don't want to deal as I don't always want to be wearing my teaching hat. And sometimes there's a pressure I feel like, or maybe a pressure I give myself. I could be creating a lecture right now, or I could be Googling an activity. And it's almost like I'm trying to do too much. Seeing an authentic, more transparent side behind the education process, I think to me, at least is one of my own personal goals, are like trying to humanize us almost.
Definitely.
I'm not sure if that makes sense at all, but
no, that totally makes sense.
All right, Cassie, I think we did a good job for episode 0. We've introduced. Could you tell the audience and probably me as well what is our social media again? I'm not too friendly on this.
You're not hip with the youth.
No, I want to corrupt them. Oh, that's something you should touch on. Why corrupt the youth, Cassie? That sounds pretty bad. It sounds like we're doing bad things to people. What would you tell someone who didn't understand the reference?
So, corrupting the youth is a reference to the death of Socrates. So, you've probably heard of Socrates back in the day in ancient Greece. He was a teacher, right? So, he was trying to educate and teach some controversial ideas. He was sentenced to death for it. And the official sentence that Socrates received was that he was going to be put to death for corrupting the youth. So essentially, I'm just like, this is a way to present us as like badasses who are, gonna educate people, and education is really badass. So we're gonna be like Socrates in a way without the controversial bad opinions about women. So you should be able to find us on both Twitter and Instagram at Corrupt Youth Pod. Or if email is more your style, you can get in touch with us by emailing us at corruptingtheyouthpod@gmail.com. When this episode goes live, at that point, we'll also start posting episodes bi-weekly on both Apple Podcasts and Spotify. So you can always find us in those places.
That sounds like a plan. Hopefully you enjoyed this chaotic energy, because low-key, this is what we're probably going to be bringing into the future.
Yeah, this is what every episode is probably going to be like.
All right then, folks. I hope you have a good rest of your day. Thank you for listening to our inaugural episode. And corrupt that youth. I don't think that should be an All right, yeah, stop there.
Okay.
Corrupt.